You've probably seen the videos, the soft music, the slow, intentional living, the baking, the sewing. The labels came quickly. Tradwife, they said, as if one word could explain a whole person. But here's what we forget. Behind every label, there's a life, and behind every trend, there's a truth someone is trying to live. Let's talk about Nara Smith. Not the viral version, not the aesthetic, not the edits. We live in a world where people are categorized faster than they're understood, where labels become shortcuts to avoid the discomfort of truly seeing someone. It's easier to say she's a tradwife than it is to ask, what does she actually believe? Or what kind of life is she consciously choosing? But the truth is, labels never tell the full story. They reduce people to parts, strip away the nuance, and flatten a life into a headline. When we label someone, we often stop listening. We assume we know who they are, what they stand for, and what their choices mean. But the reality is, a label is just a surface. It's not the soul. And the soul of a person, their journey, their reasons, their evolution, can never be summed up in a single word. Nara Smith has been called many things, but none of those things truly define her. What defines her is the intentional way she lives, the values she holds, the presence she brings to her choices. That's something no label can capture. Labels make us comfortable because they give us a box to put people in, but comfort is not the same as truth. We call someone a tradwife, and suddenly we project a whole narrative onto them, one that often reflects more about our assumptions than their actual reality. We decide that if someone embraces homemaking or domestic values, they must be passive or outdated. But what if those choices come from a place of clarity, confidence, and authenticity? What if what looks traditional on the outside is actually revolutionary on the inside? There's something profoundly powerful about a person who chooses their life intentionally, especially when it goes against the mainstream narrative. And that's the part we miss when we rush to label. We miss the thought, the depth, the quiet resistance behind those choices. We miss the humanity. And this doesn't just apply to Nara or any single person. It applies to all of us. Because we've all been labeled at some point. Too emotional, too ambitious, too quiet, too much, not enough. And we've all felt the sting of being misunderstood, of having people define us based on a sliver of who we are. That's why it's so important, not just to resist labeling others, but to release the labels we've accepted for ourselves. You are not the titles someone gave you. You are not the roles you've outgrown. You are not limited by someone else's narrative. Every person is more than a moment, more than a trend, more than an opinion. And if we want to create a more compassionate world, it begins with curiosity over criticism, with understanding over assumptions, with remembering that behind every label is a layered, living, growing human being, just like you. In a world that praises hustle, urgency, and constant motion, intentional living almost feels like rebellion. It's quiet, it's still, and it doesn't always look productive on the outside. But don't mistake softness for weakness. Intentional living is one of the most powerful forms of clarity we can choose, not because it's loud, but because it's rooted. It's not about doing less for the sake of laziness. It's about doing less so you can live more deliberately. Intentional living means you're no longer rushing through your day like it's a to-do list. You're no longer performing your life for someone else's approval. It's the choice to pause and ask, why am I doing this? Who am I becoming by doing this? It's living life on purpose instead of on autopilot. And in a world that profits from our distraction, choosing presence is an act of deep power. People often confuse busy with meaningful, but just because your calendar is full doesn't mean your heart is. Just because you're constantly in motion doesn't mean you're moving in the right direction. Intentional living breaks that cycle. It asks us to slow down, not to stop progress, but to redefine it. It invites us to value depth over speed, connection over convenience, purpose over pressure. When you live intentionally, you begin to design your life instead of reacting to it. You become the artist, not just the canvas. Your energy becomes sacred. Your time becomes a reflection of what you truly value, not what the world told you to chase. And that shift, that gentle realignment, begins to echo through every part of your life. You begin to eat with awareness, not just out of habit. You speak with thoughtfulness instead of reaction. You show up in your relationships with presence instead of distraction. You no longer live for the applause of others, but for the alignment within. And from that space you gain power, not the kind that shouts or dominates, but the kind that's grounded, centered, and untouchable. The power of intentional living isn't about control, it's about consciousness. It's about choosing what you give your energy to. It's about creating space for what truly matters, and having the courage to let go of what doesn't. And that's not always easy. It means saying no to things that once made you feel validated. It means slowing down in a world that rewards speed. It means being okay with being misunderstood, because your peace is more important than proving a point. But over time, intentional living becomes your quiet superpower. It helps you build a life that doesn't just look good from the outside. It feels right on the inside. It helps you stop measuring your worth by productivity and start measuring it by alignment. And in that space of awareness, you begin to realize true power was never about how much you could do. It was about how deeply you could live. We grow up being told what success looks like. A high-paying job, a busy schedule, recognition, maybe even a certain kind of relationship or lifestyle. It's painted as a universal goal, something everyone should strive for. But no one tells you that fulfillment doesn't come in a single shape. It doesn't have one definition. It doesn't follow one path. Fulfillment, at its core, is deeply personal. What fills one person's soul might drain another's. What energizes one person might exhaust someone else. And that's not failure, that's individuality. Fulfillment comes in many forms. For some, it's standing on a stage, leading teams, building businesses. For others, it's creating a home filled with intention, raising children with patience, cooking meals with love. Some people find fulfillment in adventure and movement. Others find it in quiet routines and small moments. Neither is better. Neither is higher or lower. The only real mistake is thinking someone else's version of fulfillment has to become your own. When we expect everyone to chase the same kind of purpose, we lose the richness of diversity. We judge each other based on boxes we didn't even create. A woman who chooses a slower, more domestic life is seen as unambitious. A man who chooses to stay home with his children might be seen as less driven. But what if they're both deeply fulfilled? What if they're waking up each day with a sense of peace and clarity? Isn't that a success worth celebrating? The problem is we've confused achievement with alignment. Just because something looks impressive doesn't mean it feels meaningful. Just because something gets applause doesn't mean it brings peace. Fulfillment is about alignment, doing things that resonate with your values, your rhythm, your purpose. And when you live from that space, life begins to feel whole. Even if it's not flashy, even if no one's watching. It takes courage to admit that what others find fulfilling doesn't speak to your soul. It takes self-awareness to walk a different path, and it takes maturity to let others walk theirs without judgment. Because someone else choosing a life that's different from yours doesn't threaten your own. It reflects the beauty of having choice. Fulfillment isn't about constantly reaching. It's about returning to what matters, to what grounds you, to what brings joy that isn't dependent on the approval of others. It's the feeling you get when your actions align with your truth. When you no longer chase life, but live it fully from where you are. So if your fulfillment doesn't look like everyone else's, that's okay. It's not supposed to. Your soul isn't wired like anyone else's. And the more you honor that, the more you realize that fulfillment isn't found in comparison. It's found in connection. Connection to your values, your calling, and the version of life that feels real to you. From the moment we're born, we're handed a script. A set of expectations written by family, culture, media, and society. It tells us who to be, how to act, what success looks like, when we should have it all figured out, and what path is considered right. But true freedom doesn't come from perfectly following that script. It comes from questioning it. It comes from pausing long enough to ask, is this actually my story, or just someone else's lines I've memorized? So many people live years, even decades, fulfilling roles that were never theirs to begin with. They go to school because they're told it's the path to stability. They take jobs that pay well but drain their spirit. They say yes when everything inside them wants to say no. They follow a timeline that feels more like a race than a rhythm. But eventually there comes a moment, sometimes quiet, sometimes painful, where the soul starts to whisper, there must be more. And that's where your real story begins. Choosing your own script doesn't mean rejecting everything you've ever known. It means consciously deciding which parts align with who you truly are, and releasing the rest. It's about living in a way that reflects your values, not someone else's definition of worth. And that choice, that act of rewriting your life on your own terms, is one of the most powerful forms of freedom you'll ever experience. But freedom comes with responsibility. It asks you to know yourself, to sit with your discomfort, to unlearn the lies you've been told about success, love, gender, purpose, and identity. It challenges you to stop performing for approval and start living from authenticity. That's not always easy. Sometimes it means disappointing people who wanted you to follow the script. Sometimes it means stepping into the unknown with nothing but your truth to guide you. But every time you choose what feels aligned, even if it goes against the grain, you reclaim your power. You take the pen back from the world and start writing a story that actually feels like yours. And slowly, the noise quiets. The pressure lifts. The anxiety of trying to meet someone else's standards starts to fade. Because you're no longer chasing a life, you're living one. You begin to realize that there's no one right way to be human. There's no timeline that applies to everyone. There's no title, role, or achievement that can define your worth. True freedom is waking up each day and choosing to live in alignment with your soul, whether that looks like building a business, raising a family, traveling the world, or spending time in stillness. It's not about what others see. It's about what you feel when you're alone with yourself. It's become far too easy to judge and far too rare to understand. We scroll past people's lives in seconds, draw conclusions from snapshots, and form opinions without ever truly listening. We've confused speed with insight, and criticism with clarity. But judgment rarely leads to connection. In fact, it often builds walls where bridges could have been. What we truly need, now more than ever, is not more judgment. We need more respect. Respect doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean you have to adopt someone else's beliefs, lifestyle, or values. Respect means you recognize that every person is walking their own path, shaped by their own experiences, carrying struggles you can't always see. It means you understand that someone's different choice is not a threat to your own. And in that understanding, you create space. Space for compassion, space for dialogue, space for peace. When we judge someone, we limit them. We put them in a box. We define them by one decision, one role, one label, forgetting that human beings are layered and constantly evolving. A woman who chooses to live traditionally is called outdated. A woman who chooses independence is called selfish. A man who expresses emotions is called weak. A man who leads with strength is called controlling. No matter what someone does, the world always seems ready to judge. But what if instead we pause long enough to ask, why did they choose this? What do they value? What have they been through? That pause is where respect begins, and it's in that space that transformation becomes possible. Not just in them, but in us. The truth is, judgment often comes from fear. We judge what we don't understand. We mock what makes us uncomfortable. We tear down what challenges our own identity. But respect asks us to move beyond fear into empathy. It asks us to lean in instead of push away, to say, tell me more, instead of, you're wrong. Respect is not passive, it's active. It's choosing to see someone as a whole person, not just a projection of your assumptions. It's realizing that someone can live completely differently from you and still live meaningfully. It's letting go of the need to always be right so you can make room for being real. We don't have to agree on everything to treat each other with dignity. We don't have to live the same way to live in harmony. In fact, it's our differences that have the power to teach us the most, if we're willing to listen. And the more we replace judgment with curiosity, blame with understanding, and critique with compassion, the more we grow as individuals and as a society. Because in the end, what connects us isn't sameness. It's the shared desire to be seen, heard, and respected for who we truly are.